Welcome, Greg, to the inaugural podcast for Recruitment Transactions International. It's a real pleasure to have you on today. Recruitment Transactions International is a matching platform for buyers and sellers in the recruitment and staffing industry. And we're trying to do something a little bit different to the type of output that you would get from a corporate finance boutique or a staffing organization. Their output's valuable, but it tends to be quite transaction focused, detail focused, numbers focused, fact focused. And I think what we're trying to do with these podcasts is bring in people like yourself who've been through that journey, really understand the M&A journey, and bring in really personal and deep insights into what that means. So you and I had connected for the first time at the online summit that came out of Australia, the Buy, Grow and Sell Summit. There were Rod Hoare, I remember, was on our panel. But before that, I had heard your presentation and was very impressed with the depth and breadth of your experience and thought you would be an excellent person for us to kick off this series with. So thank you for joining us. And rather than me read out from a script all the wonderful things that you've achieved, perhaps I can turn it over to you and you can just try to summarize what you've been doing for the last 40 years. And if you can anchor that a little bit around M&A transactions, deals that you've done at a very high level, businesses you've listed and so forth, that would be really interested for our listeners.
Sure, Simon, and thank you for having me on your podcast, particularly as your first guest, which will set a very low bar for others to exceed. So that's good news. 40 years in recruitment. I think the point I'd make first of all to set the context is I'm not an M&A expert, and if you want to know how to structure a deal, etc., there's probably someone better than me. But I have built a number of recruitment companies. Including Recruitment Solutions, which started when I was 28, and 10 years later we listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. So that was an exit. That not everyone will be available to everyone, but there's some lessons on that for sure. And then 3 other businesses since then that have all been sold. So I've sold my own businesses 4 times, but I've also been on the buy side. Both at Recruitment Solutions, but also when I was international CEO of a company called Aquent, which is probably the world's largest marketing and digital recruiter based out of the US. I was the international CEO, which is what the Americans like to call the person responsible for everything outside of America. And we made over 15 acquisitions, 15 or 16 over an 8 or 9 year period in multiple countries. So, and some of them did not go well. So there's some lessons there. And that gave me great experience. And to make 15 acquisitions, you probably have 400 conversations, serious conversations, to get that far.
Sure.
In the last 10 years, I've been investing in recruitment companies, and I'm on the board currently of 16 recruitment companies. It's my job, advising. And all those companies are on a path to sale and exit, and several of them have sold. One that is public knowledge is Consult Recruitment in New Zealand, which we built to 45 people, and I was a director and a shareholder actually. And we negotiated a sale to a Japanese group, and I thought I'd done myself out of a job, but then they asked me to stay on as chairman, which has been a lot of fun actually to help it work afterwards. So I'm seeing with my current clients both they're being approached to sell, and so I find myself on the sell side, and then we're sometimes looking to buy, and I find myself on the buy side, and as an advisor. And we probably, in that period of time, there's been 10 additional acquisitions that have been made, but probably more, by those companies. So I guess my experience is in the field, seeing what works, what doesn't work, and what commands the highest premium. So I hope I'll be able to share some interesting stuff. But if you want the technical sort of advice on what to do with working capital, I'm probably not your guy.
No, wonderful. Thank you for that. That's a great introduction. Really helpful. Perhaps we can start with the sell side. And as you said, you've built businesses, you've sold businesses, you've advised on numerous transactions. It's kind of a generic question, but it's an important one. What are the things that are always front of mind for you? The most important things that a company should consider when they are getting ready to sell a business or thinking about selling a business at some point in the future?
Yeah, sure. That's a meaty topic, and I have got 7 or 8 points that I want to cover on that probably. But I'll start by just something that might be very basic, but maybe not to everybody, and that is just to clarify how the sale price of a recruitment company is normally calculated. There's many ways to skin a cat, but normally it's calculated via a multiple, as you know, Simon, of past profit, historical profit. And that could be the most recent year. And if I was on the sell side and that was the good year, that's what we'd be going for. But if I was on the buy side, I might want to average the previous 3 years because that would give us a lower number perhaps. So that all that comes into the discussion. And I'll talk about deal structure later on if it comes up. But normally the important point I wanted to make here is that it's calculated on a multiple of past profit. But what a smart buyer is really buying, Simon, is the certainty of future profits. And that is what you as a seller need to consider strongly. Because smart buyers will, and these days, people buying recruitment companies typically know what they're doing. They will assess the value of the business based on the certainty of profits in the future. And the best word to describe that is sustainability. That's the word I like to use. It's not my word, but is the business sustainable? Which means it's not reliant on the owners, who by definition, in most cases, are leaving, or the managers, or a small group of billers. And so with that in mind, let's dive into the first point I'd like to make is that your value of your company, and if you're thinking of selling, I would be looking at this probably, if not above all else, certainly up in my top 3 or 4 things, is you need annuity revenue. A recruitment company can be extremely profitable with permanent only. Indeed. But let me say this to you. If I had a recruitment company over here that was making $1 million profit, let's just make it simple, and it was all from permanent revenue, and had another recruitment company over here that was making $1 million of profit, but 60% of the gross profit or net fee income was coming from temp contract, the multiple might be 2 for the permanent one and 6, I'm exaggerating, 5 for the other one. That's literally the difference, right? So you need to be thinking about, can I build a temp contract, locum, RPO, sustainable recurring revenue, because it's not as dependent or linked to one individual as permanent placement. And I've heard figures as high as 80% of your gross profit. Understand, I'm talking about your gross profit, not your revenue, or net fee income, as I think they like to call it in the UK. 80%. I think 60% plus is still very attractive. And sometimes people get confused when I make this point. I'm not saying permanent isn't attractive. Permanent placement fees are beautiful, especially for high margin, and they drive profitability, but it's a very unfaithful lover, Simon, permanent recruitment. It will disappear on you in a downturn. So you'll get a massive increase of value if your gross profit mix is sort of 60% contract and the remainder permanent. That's the first thing I'd be looking at. The second thing a seller should be thinking about, you should do this long before you actually think you're going to sell. That's what I have spent a lot of time talking to people about, because you're growing something. You need to look at your client mix and the relationships. Again, talking about a smaller recruitment company, but remember, you're going to go through a due diligence process, right? They will look under the covers. You will have nowhere to hide. And even though you might, in your document, show that you've got 10 or 15 billing consultants, they will look at where that revenue is coming from and who holds the sales relationships. And if the sales relationships are held by 2 or 3 people, it will reduce the value because that's the weakest link. They will see that a buyer, smart buyer, will see that and say, well, if those 3 people, I've got these transactors and their numbers look good, they're good transactors of the placement, but they don't have the sales relationships. So a buyer is looking for deep embedded client relationships, and they're looking at the sector you're in, right? And they want to see the sector as being one that has a future. Now that is an opinion, but it's an informed opinion, right? And so you might get a very different multiple, Simon, for an accounting recruitment company versus an IT AI recruitment company. Potentially, they're both probably good companies, but you might get a higher multiple because of the sector. They'll be looking at the longevity of the client relationships, and they'll be looking for meaty foundation clients who provide multiple sales opportunities, but they don't want more than 10% of your gross profit from any one client because that's too risky. So it's like, I want big clients, but not one that's too big is something that they'll be looking for. People often ask me about PSAs,
Yes.
which we call it in this country, preferred supplier agreements, or PSLs, I think in the UK. They will have a value if they are actually preferred. If you're on a contract with 65 other recruitment companies and it's incredibly low margin and the client pays in 90 days, that will not add value to your business. It will reduce its value, actually, in most cases. But if it is a true preferred supplier relationship where you get exclusive work, consistent work, and it's at commercially sensible margins, that will add to the value. And then they'll look at your revenue earners. You've got to have multiple revenue earners. Again, there's three guys in a room, three people in a room. They're each billing $1 million. That's a highly profitable business. It has no value as an asset, very little. 12 people in a room with 10 people billing, making the same amount of money or even less, will have more value because you want a spread of gross profit coming from a variety of individuals because it de-risks. You know, if you've got three of you billing in a room and one guy resigns, it's a very, very, very bad day. If there's 25 of you, one guy resigns, it's a slight irritation. So they will look at your staff churn. They will look at the consultant productivity and their history. They'll run metrics like GP per consultant. They will look at total salary as a percentage of consultant GP. And they'll look at your ability to institutionalize, for want of a better word, productivity management. In other words, is there a system and a process? Or are there just 4 or 5 talented people in a room all doing their own thing? That is not attractive to a buyer. But if there's a system and a process, that is a different thing altogether. Speaking of process, you will find that a buyer will look at the processes in your business, and there is a common word in the English language, the productization of an organization or of a manufacturing process. We have to servitize. In other words, that there is a consistent, streamlined, seamless, and paperless process in the business. So it's not like Betty the high biller does it her way and the guys in the Melbourne office do it their way and the people in the accounting division, well, they use Excel spreadsheets. That's just going to, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but not a lot. Some companies are like that. And a defined and documented operating process, a fully functioning, fully utilized CRM and ATS, documentation around contracts and terms of business and evidence. They'll go in and they'll see whether your terms of business are signed. And there's plenty of recruitment companies out there, Simon, who are conducting business today without having signed terms of business. Now, that's a risk commercially to them, but as a buyer coming in, they won't like that. So they're looking for process, servitization, a system around consistency and quality, and a documented, proven, replicable, for want of a better word, training process. So all those things will add meaningfully to the value of the business or could stymie a sale. I've seen things fall over in the due diligence process because when they look under the covers, it's a dog's breakfast. You made a comment, Simon, about Australian slang. Well, there's one for you. It's a dog's breakfast of different systems. Of course, they'll look at margins. And I talked about PSAs and PSLs. Yes, if they're preferred and profitable and they pay on time, particularly if they contract and temp and they're not paying on time, that can destroy your cash flow. People don't want to buy that. They'll look at average temp margins. They'll look at average temp tenure. It's more attractive. For example, I'll give you, here's recruitment company A. They've got 60 temps out, but they're in business support and the average tenure is 2 weeks. Here's recruitment company B. They've got 60 contractors out, but they're in tech and the average tenure is 9 months. That is going to affect the value, right? Because it only takes a little wobble on the 2 week one and you can drop your workers by 20 in a month. Whereas on the IT side, you've really got to screw up to get that wrong. So, and they'll look at permanent fees, average fees, fee structure. Is it retained? Is it exclusive? And a buyer will look at your debtors' payment history, and they won't want a history of bad debts or slow payers. So that's why I made the point that even if you're not ready to sell, and even if you're not even thinking, the thing I often say to young, by that I mean people perhaps in their 30s who are still on the journey and very excited, they're like, I'm never going to sell. And I'm like, mate, you will. Promise you will want to. So get the structure in place now to ensure that you don't try in the last year before you sell to basically fix something that's dysfunctional. And the other important point is a second tier of management. This is critical. I don't know if you know this, Simon, but it is a fact that
Sure.
80% of recruitment companies worldwide have less than 10 staff. 80%. And most of those companies do not have a saleable value. If they do, it's nothing like what the owner would like and would have dreamed of. And the main reason is they don't have the ability to build a second tier of management and to leverage. So you need a succession plan. You need to prove to a buyer that the founders leaving is low risk to the sustainability of the business. That's what you're trying to do. And it's very hard for people who start recruitment companies are normally good recruiters, and they hold on to the strings, and they find it hard to delegate and build. And even in a bigger company, you need that third tier coming through. So you might have the owners, and then when I say a bigger company, let's say 100 people, like the company I'm standing in today. They've got managers and divisional managers, but then they've got team leaders coming through. There's probably a total of 30 people in leadership roles, from very junior team leaders to state director level, and that would give a buyer a lot of confidence that I've got a sustainable management team. And they would want to be seeing an appropriate reward structure and a tie-in mechanism. It's almost like the new buyer wants to know that they can earn quite quickly the allegiance of the management team that's staying, because that's really what they're going to be relying on. A couple more points. The compliance and financial management is pretty important. So behind the scenes, a lot of small recruitment companies, even when they get bigger, are not really well run financially. And remember, as I said before, the due diligence will get you. So let's look at clean historical accounts, budgeting and planning regimes. A buyer loves to see clear results, budgets and forecasts for the future, compliance, clean shareholding, not running too much creative accounting, the nanny through the company, and all that sort of stuff can be dealt with, but too much of that gets in the way. So the advice I give to companies is run your business like a big company, even when you're small. Have good financial monthly accounts, have a board, make it compliant, and keep the structures nice and clean, because as you grow, you'll need them, and when you sell, you'll definitely need them.
Oh, thanks, Greg. It's never too much. I wanted to pick up on one point, and I absolutely agree that the multiples are going to be higher if you have a predictable revenue, a recurring revenue flow in there from contracting or RPO. But I'm just wondering out loud, because I know in Japan, the market I'm talking to you from today, that there is a lot of perm businesses. And typically when buyers have come into this market, there haven't been businesses that had a contracting or RPO element. In other words, they've come in, the big players have come in, Hayes or whatever, and they bought existing perm businesses and they've bolted on a contract business, laid it on, or they've developed into RPO or something like that. I'm just wondering, for owners of perm businesses, smaller perm businesses, perhaps you've consulted or talked in the future, and they have two paths. One is to really double down on perm and, as you say, move away from a structure where they have mega billers and a lot of people not doing very much, and have a more kind of proportionate balance in terms of the revenue generation and all the other things that they need to do to make a perm business really, really good. Or perhaps it might be a defocus to jump into contracting or RPO. Like how would you typically work around that with people who aren't in contracting RPO but have an interest but don't know how to do it, or perhaps don't have the capital to get into it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's a multifaceted discussion point there. The first thing you touched on is if you are perm, there is a way to mitigate the risk of perm and make it more attractive. So multiple, as I touched on before, multiple billing consultants, a para consultant structure where there's always someone backing up so that if the head dude leaves, somebody can step in. There are ways to mitigate it and make it more attractive. And I do agree that you shouldn't just leap into temp because some guy on a webinar says that that's a smart thing to do. You first got to work out, does temp exist in your specialization? Which is not always the case, or it's not strong, perhaps. Talking to one of my clients in architecture, and she was saying she's got a good and brilliant business. She's saying there's really not much contract in architecture. I challenged that, and I was a little bit right, and she was a little bit. There's not much. There is some, but there's not as much as you might expect, or in IT. So there's no point putting all your energy into building a temp business if it doesn't really exist. So then you've got to ask yourself, do I make myself so attractive as a perm recruiter I'll still be acquired at a fair price, or do I look for some other mechanism? And it is possible that you then say, okay, I'm going to provide business support staff to architecture firms because I know that exists, and you can get it. So there are ways to think about that. There's also perhaps the problem is if you come from a perm heritage, it's very hard to even think temp and to get in love with it. So you have to probably hire somebody to lead the charge, and they might have to be, given a real incentive to do it and be a really good person with equity opportunities, and they could build it for you. Or maybe you make a small acquisition to launch into temp. So you're right in the sense that there's a number of things to think about. And I can't speak specifically for the Japan market, although I did run a business there. I had 5 people on the ground, 5 offices in Japan with Aquin. And we were 60% contract, 60 or 70% contracts. And that was in digital marketing and creative. So I know it exists. So I wouldn't dismiss it. Just, it's very easy to see what you want to see when you're in business, and you're the paradigms of the world that you brought, and we're all guilty of it, me as much as anybody. But I've had plenty of people say to me, there's no temp in this market. And then I've been able to point out that there's other companies across the road, running 400 temps in their discipline. So it needs a plan. You're quite right in that respect. It needs a plan.
Got it. Can we talk a little bit about the benefit of hindsight? And we always know it's 2020, you look back, and I'm smiling here because, I think back to the transactions I've been involved with selling CDS to Recruit Holdings just before the Lehman Shock, and some of the acquisitions I did on behalf of Recruit Holdings in China and in Southeast Asia and India and so forth. And there's always things that, I reflect on that I could have done differently, should have done differently. Nothing is ever perfect first time round, and you learn through that. But I'm curious to ask you, if I can put you on the spot a little bit, are there any specific things that you can think of in your own journey, the 4 businesses you bought and sold, where with the benefit of hindsight, you would have done something differently?
Yeah, definitely. And I will share some of those with you. I do just want to remind people, when you think about this, price is what people concentrate on, but you've got to think about deal structure as well. And it's often in the deal structure that the pain comes. When I've talked about people and when I've looked at things that have gone wrong, it hasn't been whether it was a 4 times multiple or a 4.5 times multiple. It's the 3 years earnouts and what happened after that, and the destruction of a brand, for example, or a change of commission structures. That's where the pain comes. So let me give you a couple of things. You've asked what can happen. One thing to think about is, which is an irony, is that the bigger your company gets and the more profitable it is, typically the fewer buyers that you will have for that company. Right? So if there's a company, I'm sitting here in Sydney, there's a company across the road that's making $1 million, pretty much all my clients could afford to buy it. If it was making $10 million, none of my clients could afford to buy it, and there's only a small group that could. So as you build your company, it's really quite helpful to identify the buyer profile and make your company attractive to that profile, because you can sell your company to your senior management. I've seen that done very well. It could be a multinational group from another country. It could be private equity. That's happening at the moment. So it could be an IPO. And if it's an IPO, you're going to build a very different structure and offer something very different or very particular to the market. So I learned that as I went through the process. The other thing I learned is you've got to cut the emotion when you're the seller. Because I don't think I've ever met a seller, including myself, who didn't wildly overestimate the value of their own company. And a great question to ask yourself is, knowing what I know, would I buy my company for the price I want for my company? That's a really good question, because you go to yourself, are you kidding? I'm not going to pay 10 million for this. I know all these bad things. I know that the plumbing's leaking. So I think it's a good question, and it's one that you should, share with the team and say, the right people on the team, the senior people, what must we fix? You've got to focus on what the buyer will see, because that's going to impact the price. And it's like selling a house. It's not what you think it's worth. It's what somebody will pay. So some of the other mistakes I think people have made, and I'll get to some of my own doozies in a minute, is don't try to put lipstick on a pig. And what I mean by that is, if you want to, you know how people, slap some paint on their house and put some new pot plants out, and that's going to increase the value. Maybe it works. It doesn't work with a recruitment company, right? They're going to go in there and they're going to see. So you've got to fix the foundations. And I think a lot of people have tried to pretty it up. You see it, people putting little mergers together and trying to present this thing as though it's one thing. It's not. And it almost always ends in tears for somebody. So I think the other thing is, bring the senior people on the journey. What I mean by that is, at some point, you've got to time this, and they need to know what your plans are. And you might need to incentivize them and make it in their interests to align your goals with their aspirations. Because if you get to the day, like if you sell your company and then bring your senior management and say, good news, I've sold the company, here's your new owner, that is not going to play well. And people have done almost that. So very important to do that, and mistakes made there all the time. The other thing is to watch the economic cycle. People plan as though they've got control over that. And, right now is actually an interesting time, because there are a number of recruitment companies on the market. Sellers are bullish on the expectation around price. Some of those people are at an age where they really would like to sell. And some of those people will hold on for too much and will go into the next downturn, and they'll have to wait 5 more years. And just remember that the economic downturn we saw with COVID was not normal. It was sharply down and sharply up, and that's not how cycles typically go. If you go back to you talked about the Lehman Brothers, it was 3 or 4 years of pain before we got back to where we were before that. So that's something to watch for, that you can't assume that because you're on a nice upwards trajectory, that in 2 years' time when you're ready to sell, that it will still be tracking that way. You may have gone back 40% in gross profit and no one wants to buy you. And you have the choice of locking the door and walking away, or putting another 5 years in. One of the things I did that is contrary to all the advice I'm giving, and it didn't work great for me. It wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't great. We engineered after the Lehman Brothers what we in this country call the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis of 2009-ish, 8 and 9. I was running Aquint. I was running 35 offices of Aquint around the world, 17 countries, and it had 8 years of stellar growth. I began to believe I couldn't do anything wrong. Well, I could, and the Lehman Brothers decline showed that. But it did offer an opportunity for us to do a management buyout of 10 of the Aquint offices with their support, and they stayed as a minority shareholder. I became the majority shareholder and had a lot of people with shares in the business, and off we went. And the mistake was that I tried to time the market like somebody tries to time the stock market. I was like, look at our permanent revenues. They've dropped 60%. I get these businesses for virtually nothing. All I got to do is build it back to the place I built it before, and I'll sell it for, a lot of money. Well, first of all, a lot of those businesses were not run by people who were strong enough to run them in a down market. They'd been very good when the market was buoyant, but it hid a massive number of weaknesses in the business. Secondly, the permanent market took years to come back. And so I was lecturing people about not trying to build permanent only businesses. Prior to that, went out and did exactly that. We did have some temp, but nowhere near the levels that I've just told everyone on this podcast that they should do. And as a result, and we were in 10 countries. Right? So I was trying to run a business in 10 countries, stretching from UK and France to Japan and Singapore and Australia. And so massive challenges around managing what was like a startup. It wasn't. We had momentum, but we didn't have deep pockets. So we had to build this business. And that was just, it was, I won't say it was hubris. That's probably being a little harsh on me. But I was just a little bit too cute. I thought I could time it, buy it at the bottom for nothing, and 3 years, 4 years later, sell it for $1 zillion. Well, it didn't happen that way. We did sell it, but our the permanent just took too long to come back.
In the spirit of transparency, maybe I can share a couple of things that I wish in hindsight I'd done differently. And the first goes back to those times, like Lehman Shock and so on. So when we sold this, as in my business partner Jason and myself, we sold this business CDS to Recruit. The deal was structured in such a way that we took 80% up front, 20% was target focused over the next couple of years. And then we stepped straight into Lehman Shock and the downturn in the economy. So we had no kind of like act of God clause or something like that in our contracts. And you know, that was a little bit of a painful lesson on the back end. There was something that we got, but it could have been structured differently. So that's one thing I learned from that. And on the buy side, working with Recruit, I think, to be honest, you know, when we went into new markets in India and China, a lot of the conversations were quite high level, and I wouldn't say superficial, but they were all kind of like vision. Yeah, we're going to partner China and Japan, and India and Japan. We're going to get together, and it's all going to be wonderful. But I think when you buy a business, it's the one chance that you have, and you have lock-ins and you have earn-outs and so on. It's the one time that you have to really make sure that, you know, what good looks like for you actually is what good looks like for them. So, you know, just being a little bit more rigorous in terms of, yes, we want you to be on our applicant tracking system within 6 months or 12 months. Yes, we want you to do this in terms of specialization, whatever the things that we probably talked loosely about. They weren't part of agreements in some cases. And I think in hindsight, if we'd done that, we might have got, you know, a better outcome. So yeah, we always learn, don't we, when we go back in time. And
we do. It's interesting, Simon, that you talk about India. When I was running Aquin, we bought a business in India, and I made exactly the same mistake. Really nice people and authentic. There was no trickery or skullduggery, but I was so carried away with the match and the idea of getting into a booming, evolving market that a lot of the I's weren't dotted and T's crossed, and there was misalignment on what exactly was going to happen, and it didn't go great. And we didn't. It wasn't a success. So I have made quite a number of errors. I think on the buy side again, I remember in Melbourne we were doing great, and we bought probably one of our biggest competitors. And I don't think we did a good enough job. I think the owner, you know, she was on her way out, but we thought we'd done a good job of winning the hearts and souls of the second tier of management, but on the day, I mean, it was pretty transparent. On the day her earnout finished, those senior people resigned.
Yeah, and maybe if we could just conclude on the buy side, if you a few other additional comments that you might have. You know, when you evaluate the business from the buyer's perspective, and you've advised and are advising many clients on transactions in that way, beyond the numbers, you know, what else are you? And you have touched on it before, but what else are you looking at, like to make sure that there's a more likelihood of a successful outcome, if you like?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, the first thing I would do is I would go back to, on the buy side, I would go back to that list that I gave for sellers And as a buyer, I'd make sure they were all there. So the sustainability. But I think the thing that I'm often talking to people about when they're thinking about buying is I say, will 1 and 1 make 3? And they look at me like that. So we're not buying this just to bolt on revenue. We're buying this because the marriage will create fertile offspring. I'm really mixing my metaphors today, but still. It needs to be strategic, right? So we're an accounting recruiter and we bought this marketing recruiter. Does that mean that we can sell our accounting services to the marketing recruiter's clients and vice versa? Or we're an accounting recruiter in permanent and we bought this small temp business. Can we assume that if we do it well, that the 1 and the 1 will end up making 3? So that is really important because that's how you add incremental value to your business, right? What is the cross-sell opportunity? There's also the costs that can be taken out, which can be substantial, but that's kind of one-off and it's limited, and in a sense, it's negative. But clearly, you don't need 2 accounting teams, back office accounting teams to run your business, all that kind of stuff. More, what is the opportunity to grow? And so I often, you've got to be careful on the buyer side not to get seduced by all the sexy numbers. Look below the surface and look for weaknesses and evaluate. You get very carried away when you see something exciting. This is maybe a perfect fit. The people are nice. We love their clients. They've got all the clients we don't have. And I've often said, and I wish I'd said it to myself more in the early days, that's great. Let's put it up. Let's park it over here. Now, where are the weaknesses? Let's specifically look at the pain points. And there will be pain points. And that's okay. As long as you evaluate how you're going to deal with them and how it's going to be done and whether all parties will agree. Brand, for example. Man, I've seen people buy recruitment companies and then change the brand on the first day, which often abrogates all the value that they bought. And I've seen others who try and build multiple brands, and some have done it successfully, but others not so much.
Yep.
So I think you as a buyer, you try and anticipate big known issues with the sellers and square them away prior to striking a deal. Brand is a big one. You really need to have good conversations about that. And a lot of people don't. They say, no, it'll be all right. It'll be fine. And then once they own the business, they change the brand, upset everyone, lose clients, lose consultants. I think it's just, we're going to keep a brand or we're going to keep it for a year and then we slowly and have a conversation with the seller so that you get their agreement. Because you don't want the seller saying, you changed my brand, therefore you screwed up my opportunity to make my earnout. That's just one example. Other examples could include the actual roles of the departing owners. What exactly are they going to do? You may not want them to do exactly what they've done before. You might be buying a business where you have perfect people to step into their roles and you want them to be more ambassadorial or whatever you want. That needs to be discussed and squared away. These I call it misalignment. These are the areas of misalignment that happen after the purchase that cause great pain and loss of value and trust. So I would look at the commission structures and the futures, the roles of the sellers second tier, people they've got great relationship with. What's going to happen to those people? Again, examples of people buying other people and then firing half their staff, which doesn't make for a great, you've got to remember that when you sell a recruitment business, you sell your house, you turn the lock in the door, you walk away. You never have to think about, if they go and put red carpet or burn it down, it doesn't worry you. But when you sell your recruitment business, 2 things. First of all, you're going to be on an earnout, so you're going to be there. It's like a marriage for a few years. But even beyond that, it's your brand, it's your legacy, it's your friends, and you want them to have a good future, typically. Most people don't just want to walk away and let it die.
Yeah, and I think going back to Recruit Holdings, I think that's one thing I'm incredibly happy about, not just the money side of the transaction or how they looked after me personally and my business partner. The fact is they didn't rush into rebranding CDS to RGF. It took them many years to do that, and a lot of things that made my old company, I think, successful, the commission systems, the the incentives, the team trips and so forth, they've kept those. They haven't changed the culture. In fact, the guy running the business in Japan right now is someone who was working for me before we sold to Recruit, so sort of 14 years later. So it's really good to see. And I do agree.
Yeah.
And I think particularly when you go into new markets, I think obviously Recruit, they're in Japan, we're in Japan, they understand us. When you move further away from home base, like your India experience, our India experience, you don't really know what good is like, right? You see something and you may judge on an audience of one or two, and the due diligence side is really, really important. And I think one of the things that through Recruitment Transactions International we're trying to do is build really deep intelligence at the local level, speaking to sellers about their business and understanding it beyond just the numbers. So really diving into the underbelly to understand, and hopefully that will be more successful transactions down the way.
Just to wrap up on looking beyond
Yep.
the numbers, one of the things that the questions that I like to ask that often causes pause for thought when people are thinking of acquiring is to consider the opportunity cost. We're about to spend $10 million on this business. If we didn't do that, what could we do with $10 million?
No, I was going to say, and it's a great point. And in connection with that, there's this thing called sunk cost as well, right? Like the buy team has put so much time and effort into it that even if there are things that may not feel right, it's kind of like, oh, we put all this effort and time into it. It's $10 million. Are we really going to start all over again? But that's a huge mistake, as we know, right? Sunk cost. Yeah.
I think it is. It's definitely a massive mistake to think that way, but it's human to think that way. And so sometimes I say to people, I may have said it just in the boardroom next door recently, if we didn't spend that $10 million on that company, if I gave you $10 million to spend on incremental growth, do you think you could do something with it? And everyone went, oh yeah, I think we could hire a lot of people and do a lot of things. So it's just a case of a sanity check. Doesn't acquisition, I'm often, and I said it today, if it just bolts on the revenue and you can't see any exponential value beyond that, like acquisition of strategic clients or some geographical or sector upside or the quality of the incoming management, then think hard, because the money and the time you're going to spend making that new thing work could be spent just making your current thing work even better. Just something to think about.
But maybe I can just conclude a couple more things I wanted to cover, but before we talk about some of the things that you've done with your book and the training academy, I just want to ask one final question about the Australian New Zealand market, where you are right now. And what you touched on it earlier on in terms of some of the opportunities, but could you expand on that a little bit? What are you seeing? What are the businesses that are likely to attract buyers at this point, and in what sectors perhaps, and what areas?
Definitely IT and digital is very, very hot. As you would expect. The world is digitizing. Those companies did not suffer in COVID as much as others. They are absolutely, I'm on the board of 3 IT recruitment companies, 2 in Sydney and 1 in New Zealand. And they are all 15-year-old companies, and they're all having a record all-time growth in revenue and profits. So they are definitely hot. But the sellers know that, and the multiples being asked are... well, I wanted to use the word ambitious. If they get them, then they're realistic. So we don't know. But that's definitely hot. The health area, health recruitment in this market, we've got an aging population. We've got a public healthcare system that you may not want to spend the rest of your life in. As a result, healthcare recruitment is huge and growing, and it's both permanent and locum, as they call it. So that's been something that I've seen a lot of interest in. It's a different world to, and one of my clients in accounting said, let's get into health. And I said, mate, what do you know about it? Have you got anything to offer? Not really. That wouldn't have been smart. And then logistics, supply chain is an area that I'm seeing some interest in. There's a lot of talk about acquisition. I'm speaking about Australia. I've been sort of stuck in Australia apart from New Zealand for like everyone else, I guess, for the last 2 or 3 years. So I haven't done my normal travel. So I speak mostly about Australia. The expectations on the sell side are very high. And so there's a lot of talking and seducing and flirting, but there's not a lot of consummation. There's another metaphor that I should perhaps not have used, but it doesn't matter. Let's use it. So there are acquisitions happening, not as many as you might expect. Plus now, the added little extra ingredient in the cocktail is that some people are beginning to worry about a downturn. And, we talked about, timing can make you look like a genius or a fool, Simon. It really can. And I've got a friend who runs a substantial recruitment business, and he had one of the worst experiences in acquisition. Obviously, I won't mention who it is, but it is an operating company now. But they were doing great in Australia, and they wanted to expand to the UK, and they went to the UK, and they bought a 100-person recruitment company. And in 2007. And it was all permanent, and they paid a 9 times multiple. So the market got so frothy. And 2 years later, they had 9 people in a room in London. The UK was devastated by that Lehman Brothers thing. The recruitment market, I was running a business there. I wasn't there, but I had a business in London and in Manchester, so I know how we suffered. And thank God for our contracting business. So that's what happened to him from 100. And it completely decimated that business, but also the home mothership back home was shaken. And I don't think they've ever recovered from it. They still exist, but I don't think they ever recovered from it. And yes, you can point the finger and say, why would you pay 9 times? You can point the finger and you can say it's all permanent. But at the time, it looked like a great thing to do. And that is a very stark example of how we can get it wrong. And I'm not belittling that individual or the company. I've made similar mistakes, not quite the magnitude, but similar mistakes, and they've been made many times over. I would actually go as far as to say that the majority of acquisitions in recruitment, that is not right. A lot of acquisitions in recruitment end in disappointment for either buyer or seller, or both. And it's mostly because not going through the nitty-gritty of matched expectations about what's going to happen afterwards. It's not so much the price. Price, you agree and you're okay with it. It's promises and the way it plays out over the earn-out that is normally the thing that goes wrong. So I encourage a lot of transparency and effort in that.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with you on that. I've seen that firsthand. You have written an amazing book, The Savage Truth. You also have a training academy, and both of those add a lot of value to our industry. I would encourage people to take a look at those, but it'd be helpful if you could just share a few words about both of those initiatives, and also if you could anchor it in connection with what we've been talking today about. If there's any relevant parts that would help buyers and sellers in the recruitment staffing industry, that would be very helpful.
Well, thanks, Simon. Yeah, I wrote that book, The Savage Truth. I mean, what else could I call it with a name like Savage, and with a personality like mine? I wrote it to capture what I hoped were the major lessons in a 40-year career. It's also something of a history of the recruitment industry because, when I started in recruitment in January 1980, I know you've been around too, Simon, for a while. It's a very different world, and there's some historical interest, but mostly it's sharing what I think is the DNA of a great recruiter. And then the second half of the book is how to build a recruitment business. And it tells the story of the sales. It tells the story of the mistakes. It tells some of the conversation we've had today would be in that book. So I think if you're a recruiter or an owner of a recruitment company, I hope that you'll find it useful. You go to my website, gregsavage.com.au. Somewhere in the drop-down buttons, you'll see the Savage Truth book. And you can get it from Amazon or any other place. But if you're in the UK or in Australia, where I have a publisher in each place, they are giving big discounts there. But I mean, really, it brings it down from, I don't know, $30 to $15. It's affordable for most recruiters. And then the Recruitment Academy is born out of the fact that I've done a lot of training over the years. But mostly, I think one of the things that is a missed opportunity is the standard of development and training of recruiters. And, I'm talking about our whole industry. I'm talking about myself as well. It is our biggest asset in a real sense in our industry, because I think if you go to your P&L, you'll see you're spending 60 to 70% of every dollar you make on staff salaries. So the leverage point in recruitment is improving the ability of your recruiters and your managers. And that academy is an online video subscription model. So there's about 50 hours of training and coaching on all recruitment skills and also on leadership. And there's also a director's component where these sorts of topics are discussed. And we're also adding new content every month. So it's up to date with the market. And just this month, I've introduced, it's all Greg Savage on that thing. So is too much Savage ever enough? I think the answer to that is yes. So I'm bringing outside experts on, owners of recruitment companies, not trainers, but owners of recruitment. Well, they train, but it's not their profession. They run recruitment business. I want to keep it very close to the coalface. And we've started with that. So it's very affordable, and you subscribe and you can get out of it any quarter you like. So it's not like we lock you in. And it's not a solution to the training of people. It's a tool. It's a very useful tool, but just one of many that you should use to develop people. So thanks, Simon, for giving me the opportunity to talk about those two things.
Not at all. We're just going to wrap up now, Greg. An hour's flown by. I feel we could have talked a lot longer, and you and I will continue to collaborate, find ways to talk. Very interested in what you're doing with the businesses you're advising, and some of those, as you mentioned, are prime for exit, or having those conversations right now. So the best of luck with that, and very much hope that when the borders continue open further, especially coming into Japan, we get to meet in person. But yeah, thank you so much for what's been a very illuminative and a very insightful podcast. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And good luck to everybody who listens to this. I hope there's a few tips there that people can think about. As I say, I'm no expert. I'm just a guy who's made a lot of blunders, got a few things right in this journey. I see a lot of people, I'll wrap up by saying this, Simon, I see a lot of people work really hard and build potentially good businesses, but they're just mistaking it to that next level where it shifts from being a lifestyle business to an asset. And when you build an asset that doesn't rely on you every day, it has a value, but it also gives you a very, very valuable thing. It gives you choice. You could sell it, you can keep building it, you can go and grow olives in the Hunter Valley and someone else can run it for you, and you can just live off the dividends. Most recruitment company owners have no choice. They have to come in and do the same thing every day. So that's what I've learned, building choice for yourself. So thanks, mate. Good to chat. And I feel strange when you say we haven't met, because I feel we know each other, but we will meet. We will meet soon.
Crazy online world we live in. Thank you so much, Greg. Have a great rest of the day. Take care.
Thanks.
Now. All the best.